She remembered the glint in Richard Thorne's eyes, the kind of glint that belonged to a predator sizing up its prey, and a shiver, not of fear, but of cold ambition, ran down her spine. He'd just finished a scathing critique of her team's latest proposal, tearing it apart with surgical precision, only to pivot seamlessly to a charming, almost paternal smile as his 4-year-old granddaughter, Lily, toddled into the boardroom. Lily, a whirlwind of blonde curls and boundless energy, oblivious to the corporate carnage she was interrupting, had clutched a crumpled drawing in her tiny fist, her eyes wide with a secret importance. "Grandpa," she'd chirped, tugging on the hem of his bespoke suit, "I drew your special house, the one with the quiet garden and the funny fence." Thorne's smile had faltered, a barely perceptible twitch as he quickly scooped her up, his gaze sweeping the room, a silent warning to everyone present. He'd laughed, a booming, dismissive sound, and said, "Oh, Lilybug, that's just a made-up house for your imagination, sweetie. Grandpa lives right here, remember?" But Anna, observant to a fault, had noticed the way his grip tightened on the child, the fleeting shadow that crossed his usually impenetrable face. It was a crack in the armor, a glimpse behind the gilded facade of the man who ran Thorne Enterprises, a monolithic real estate empire that cast its long shadow across the New York City skyline. Anna Davis had clawed her way up the corporate ladder at Thorne Enterprises, sacrificing friendship, sleep, and a semblance of a normal life for the relentless pursuit of success. She believed in the hustle, in the unforgiving meritocracy Thorne had cultivated. She lived in a sleek, minimalist apartment in Tribeca, ate her meals from meal prep services, and considered her laptop an extension of her own nervous system. Her world was defined by quarterly reports, aggressive market analyses, and the constant pressure to innovate. Thorne was her idol, a self-made titan who had built an empire from nothing, or so the legends claimed. His Hamptons estate, where the board meetings often convened during summer, was a testament to his power. Sprawling lawns, infinity pools, and a helipad, all meticulously maintained, a fortress of opulence. It was a stark contrast to her own humble beginnings in a small town in upstate New York, where dreams of skyscrapers felt like science fiction. Her entire existence revolved around proving herself worthy of this world, of this success. The incident with Lily, however, lingered like a dissonant note in an otherwise perfectly orchestrated symphony. It was small, insignificant, but it gnawed at her. The special house, the quiet garden, the funny fence. Lily was a bright child, imaginative, yes, but also remarkably grounded for her age. Children, Anna knew, often distilled complex realities into simple, poignant observations. Thorne's reaction had been too swift, too definitive. It wasn't the usual indulgent chuckle of a doting grandfather. It was the calculated response of a man guarding a secret. Anna, despite her ambition, possessed an innate curiosity that often bordered on an investigative instinct, a trait she usually suppressed in favor of corporate decorum. But this time, something felt different. She found herself replaying the scene, analyzing Thorne's micro-expressions, the subtle shift in his tone, the memory of the drawing, a child's crude rendition of a small, quaint house surrounded by overgrown bushes, oddly out of place amidst Lily's usual drawings of princesses and unicorns, kept resurfacing in her mind. The normalcy of her life at Thorne Enterprises was a tightly controlled narrative of ambition and achievement. Every morning began at 5 a.m. with a Peloton workout, followed by a protein shake and a review of the day's agenda. Her desk was immaculate, her schedule packed. She thrived in the competitive environment, relished the intellectual sparring with her colleagues, but the innocent words of a 4-year-old had introduced a minute tremor, a barely perceptible crack in the pristine surface of her meticulously constructed reality. It wasn't a moral dilemma yet, merely a flicker of curiosity, an intellectual puzzle in a world usually dominated by financial ones. She told herself it was probably nothing, a figment of a child's imagination or a misinterpretation on her part. But the image of Thorne's face, that fleeting shadow, kept telling her otherwise. It was the first fissure, a tiny, almost invisible fault line that would eventually cleave her entire world in two. She remembered a whispered conversation between two senior VPs in the break room about Thorne's eccentricities, his ghosts from the past, dismissed as office gossip, but now taking on a new, unsettling resonance. The seed of doubt, planted by Lily's innocent revelation, had begun to sprout. That evening, instead of diving into market reports, Anna found herself scrolling through old local news archives, a habit she'd picked up from her days as a journalism major before pivoting to business. She started with Thorne's early career, focusing on the decades before he became the household name he was today. It was a long shot, a needle in a haystack, but the image of that crude drawing, the funny fence and quiet garden, persisted. She searched for properties Thorne might have owned or developed in his nascent years, away from the glittering skyscrapers. Her initial searches yielded nothing of interest, just the usual press releases and corporate announcements. But she was persistent, driven by a nascent, unacknowledged hunger for truth that was beginning to eclipse her usual drive for profit. She was searching for a different kind of value now, one not listed on the stock exchange. The air in her apartment felt heavier, charged with an unspoken tension, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for her to uncover something. It was just a feeling, a hunch, but Anna had learned to trust her instincts. She had a gut feeling that Lily's innocent words were not just a child's fantasy, but a breadcrumb trail leading to something far more substantial and perhaps far more dangerous. The more Anna delved, the more she felt a strange pull, a fascination beyond mere corporate espionage. She found herself looking at old property records, digging through obscure local newspaper archives from small towns up and down the East Coast, places far removed from the glitz of Manhattan. It was painstaking work, hours lost down digital rabbit holes. Most of it was mundane. Routine land acquisitions, zoning changes, small-scale commercial developments. But then a name surfaced, an almost forgotten article from a small-town paper in upstate New York, tucked away in the microfiche section of a public library's online database. It detailed a controversial land acquisition by a fledgling company called Thorne Properties nearly 40 years ago. The piece spoke of a community of working-class families who had lived for generations on a plot of land that was suddenly deemed vital for a major commercial development. The residents had been encouraged to sell, their homes deemed dilapidated and unfit for modern living. The article, barely 2 paragraphs long, painted a grim picture of displacement, of families uprooted, their cries for fair compensation largely ignored by the powerful, burgeoning corporation. This wasn't the glamorous origin story Thorne so often recounted. This was raw, ugly, and felt wrong. The property was described as having a unique, almost secluded layout, with a large, overgrown garden and an unusual, handcrafted fence surrounding a small, quaint house. Anna felt a jolt. The quiet garden, the funny fence. This was it, the first tremor. The moral problem appeared, stark and unsettling. The article didn't directly accuse Thorne of anything illegal, but the underlying tone was one of injustice, of a powerful entity preying on the vulnerable. It suggested that a significant portion of the land, after the displacement, was never fully developed, remaining a desolate, forgotten corner, a scar on the landscape. This forgotten corner, the article vaguely implied, included one small, persistent holdout property whose owners had refused to sell until the very last minute, their fate unclear. Anna suddenly understood. Lily's drawing wasn't of a fantasy house. It was of a forgotten ghost, a property Thorne had acquired under dubious circumstances, perhaps one he occasionally visited, a place where he harbored a secret. The thought chilled her. Was this the special house Lily had seen? A place Thorne kept hidden, away from his polished public persona. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. What would you do when faced with a truth that could either make you or break you? Anna knew deep down that this information, if properly leveraged, could be her golden ticket. It wasn't just a promotion, it was a way to make a definitive mark, to prove her unparalleled resourcefulness. She could subtly bring it to Thorne's attention, perhaps through an anonymous tip that would force his hand, or by positioning herself as the one who discovered a potential vulnerability and then fixed it for him. The possibilities swirled in her mind, each one promising a significant career advancement. The world of Thorne Enterprises was a dog-eat-dog environment, and she had always played by its rules, albeit with a certain detached professionalism. Survival meant being sharper, more ruthless than the next person. She saw this not as a betrayal, but as an opportunity, a way to climb higher, to solidify her position in a way no quarterly report ever could. She considered what her mentor, a hardened corporate lawyer, often said, "Information isn't power unless you know how to wield it." And Anna, she realized, was learning to wield it. Her next step was calculated. She initiated a new internal project, a historical review of key property acquisitions, framing it as a way to identify dormant assets or uncover potential liabilities from the company's long history. It was a clever maneuver, giving her legitimate access to old property deeds, financial statements, and internal correspondence that predated the digital age. She spent late nights in the dusty archives, poring over paper documents, feeling like an archaeologist unearthing ancient secrets. The paper trails led her deeper into Thorne's past, revealing a pattern of aggressive tactics, shrewd legal maneuvering, and a relentless drive that often bordered on unethical. She found references to shell corporations, opaque holding companies, and a distinct lack of transparency in many of the older deals. It was a masterclass in corporate opacity, a testament to Thorne's early genius in navigating legal grey areas. A particularly disturbing detail emerged, an internal memo from Thorne himself, dating back to that controversial upstate land deal. It was short, dismissive, and written in his own hand, scrawled across a legal pad. It read, "Expedite. The sentimentality of these people is costing us too much. Offer a lump sum. If refused, begin condemnation proceedings. We need that land clear by Q2. The word sentimentality was underlined twice. It was a chilling insight into his mindset, a glimpse into the man before the polished PR machine. This was her first concrete piece of evidence, not just of a questionable deal, but of Thorne's personal indifference to human suffering. It hardened her resolve not to expose him, but to use this knowledge wisely. She saw a path where she could discreetly clean up these old liabilities, presenting herself as the solution, the one who prevented future scandals without ever having to publicly implicate Thorne. She was solving the problem, or so she told herself, in a way that benefited both her and the company, and in a way that wouldn't cause a massive public relations nightmare. She carefully packaged her findings into a confidential internal report, focusing only on the financial risks and dormant asset potential, carefully omitting any mention of the ethical implications or the human cost. She presented it to Thorne's most trusted advisor, a stoic woman named Eleanor Vance, framing it as a proactive measure to safeguard the company's legacy. Eleanor, always a woman of few words, listened intently, her eyes like steel traps. Anna anticipated a subtle nod, a quiet approval. What she got was far more. A week later, she was called into Thorne's office. He was sitting behind his enormous mahogany desk, the city sprawling behind him, looking more like an emperor than a CEO. He leaned forward, a rare, almost vulnerable look in his eyes. "Anna," he said, his voice surprisingly soft, "Eleanor tells me you've uncovered some historical inefficiencies. Good work. Proactive. That's what I like to see." He paused, a pregnant silence hanging in the air. I'm creating a new special projects division. You're in charge. Double your salary, a significant bonus, and you report directly to me. Your first task, ensure these inefficiencies are resolved discreetly. Anna felt a surge of triumph, a wave of relief washing over her. She had done it. She had found a solution. She had navigated the moral labyrinth and come out on top, her ambition validated, her future secured. This was the false exit, the moment she believed she had solved the situation, without compromising her own ethics, without actually confronting the deeper truth. The promotion was swift and public, elevating Anna to a position she had only dreamed of. Her name was now mentioned in the same breath as some of Thorne's top lieutenants. Colleagues who had once viewed her as a competitor now looked at her with a mix of respect and envy. She had proven her mettle, showing not just ambition, but a shrewdness that Thorne clearly valued. She moved into a corner office with breathtaking views of the city, a tangible symbol of her new power. The increase in salary allowed her to pay off her student loans, upgrade her apartment, and finally buy that vintage Rolex she'd been coveting. She felt invincible, walking on air, convinced she had played the game perfectly. The Inefficiencies Project was a convenient veil for her to continue her investigation, now with legitimate resources and authority. She rationalized her actions. She wasn't exposing Thorne, she was protecting him, and by extension, the company that had given her everything. She was cleaning up old messes, ensuring future stability. It was a win-win, she convinced herself. This was the pinnacle of corporate success, the sweet taste of victory after years of tireless work. Meanwhile, Lily, oblivious to the corporate machinations swirling around her innocent observations, continued to be a charming, if sometimes perplexing presence at Thorne's regular family dinners, which Anna was now expected to attend. One evening, as Anna made polite small talk with Thorne's daughter, Lily tugged on Anna's skirt. "Anna, guess what? Grandpa showed me his secret tunnel. It goes all the way to the funny fence," she whispered conspiratorially, her eyes wide. Anna froze. A secret tunnel to the house with the funny fence? Thorne, sitting across the table, caught Anna's eye and offered a tight, warning smile. He quickly interjected, "Lilybug, we've talked about imagination, haven't we? No tunnels, just your active mind." But the damage was done. Lily's words were a micro-trigger, a tiny explosion in Anna's carefully constructed narrative of control. A tunnel suggested something more than just an old property. It suggested active concealment, a deliberate effort to hide. Anna's stomach dropped. Her solution suddenly felt precarious, built on a foundation of sand. She began to discreetly adjust her investigation, shifting focus from dormant assets to undocumented access points and historical structural anomalies related to the upstate property. Her new position afforded her access to Thorne's personal security logs and architectural blueprints, something she never would have imagined before. She found cryptic entries about perimeter checks, northern boundary, and structure integrity assessments, abandoned lot in the Hamptons Estate's private security reports, all coded to highly restricted access levels. The pieces were starting to fit together in a far more unsettling way. The funny fence wasn't just a nostalgic detail, it was a boundary line, and the quiet garden was likely a secluded area he had maintained, perhaps to hide something or someone. The truth, Anna realized, was not just about unethical land deals, it was about something far more personal and immediate. One night, Anna found an old, faded black-and-white photograph tucked away in a mislabeled file within Thorne's personal archives. It showed a much younger Thorne, lean and intense, standing next to a beautiful woman with a gentle smile, cradling a baby. The woman looked nothing like Thorne's late wife or his current partner. They were standing in front of a small, quaint house with an overgrown garden and a distinctive handcrafted fence. The special house. The baby in the photo had a shock of blonde hair, eerily similar to Lily's. Beneath the photo, a single handwritten sentence, A promise made, a life forsaken. Andres, a cold dread washed over Anna. This wasn't just a controversial land deal. This was a family secret, a hidden life. Thorne had another child, a child he had abandoned or perhaps hidden away. The condemnation proceedings memo now took on a horrific new meaning. Had he not just displaced a community, but also the mother of his child, erasing their very existence to protect his burgeoning empire and carefully cultivated public image? The thought made her physically ill. This was the truth coming to light, the inversion of roles. Anna realized she wasn't protecting Thorne. She was an unwitting participant in a decades-long cover-up, and her own ambition had made her blind. The problem she thought she had solved, the inefficiencies she was tasked with resolving, now seemed like a grotesque joke. She was complicit. The thought filled her with a profound sense of disgust. Thorne wasn't just a ruthless businessman. He was a man who had erased a part of his own history, a part that involved another human being. The memory of Thorne's tight, warning smile at the dinner table and Lily's innocent words about the secret tunnel to the funny fence house now screamed with a horrifying clarity. He wasn't just hiding a property, he was hiding a life, a past love, a child, and perhaps still visiting that hidden place. The weight of this revelation pressed down on her, suffocating her. Her triumph felt hollow, tainted by this profound moral decay. The discovery of the photograph shattered Anna's carefully constructed facade of professional detachment. The image of the young woman and baby haunted her, their faces innocent, vulnerable. She couldn't shake the feeling of complicity, of having become an enabler in Thorne's decades-long deception. She went back to the original article about the land deal, rereading every word, now seeing the unspoken stories between the lines, the names of the families displaced, the small protests, the vague mentions of one family who disappeared. She felt a burning shame. Her ambition, her singular focus on climbing the corporate ladder, had blinded her to the human cost of the empire she so admired. She had looked at the past through a purely financial lens, and in doing so, had erased the very people Thorne had erased. This was the moment the hidden theme, the corruption of innocence, hit her with full force. Not just the innocence of the abandoned child, but her own, the idealistic young woman who once dreamed of journalism. She spent days in a haze, her work suffering. The glittering skyline outside her office window now seemed to mock her, a monument to greed and forgotten promises. She tried to find information about the woman and child in the photograph. It was like chasing ghosts. Thorne had done an exceptional job of erasing them from public records, a testament to his power and ruthlessness. But there was a small, almost imperceptible clue. A university alumni newsletter from decades ago, mentioning a scholarship recipient from the small town, a young artist named Clara Vance, the same last name as Eleanor Vance, Thorne's right hand. Eleanor, the stoic, unreadable woman. Could there be a connection? The thought sent a jolt of icy fear through Anna. If Eleanor knew, had she been an accomplice too? Or was she also a victim, a keeper of a secret she couldn't escape? This revelation plunged Anna into a profound internal conflict. Her entire career, her hard-won success, was intertwined with Thorne's empire, built on a foundation of lies and forgotten lives. To expose him would mean destroying everything she had worked for, her reputation, her financial security. It would mean becoming an outcast in the very world she had fought so hard to enter. But to stay silent, to continue to be a part of the cover-up, felt like an unbearable weight on her conscience. She saw Lily's innocent face, then the baby's face in the photograph, and a powerful wave of empathy, a feeling she rarely allowed herself in her cutthroat corporate world, washed over her. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about right and wrong, about a fundamental human injustice. She found herself revisiting an old text message, one from her sister, sent years ago when Anna first moved to New York. "Don't forget where you came from, Anna. Don't let them change you." The words echoed in her mind, a stark reminder of her roots, of the values she had once held dear. This was the moral discovery, the fourth turning point. Anna realized her own flaw. Her relentless ambition had allowed her to rationalize away the humanity in her pursuit of success. She had seen the world through Thorne's eyes, a world where people were assets or liabilities, not individuals with lives and feelings. Lily's innocent words, initially a spark of curiosity, had become a burning torch, illuminating the dark corners of Thorne's past and, by extension, her own soul. The choice was agonizing, a battle between self-preservation and a newly awakened sense of justice. She could continue to climb, pretend she never saw the photograph, ignore the ghost of Thorne's past. Or she could risk everything, tear down the empire, and face the consequences. This was her true test, not of her business acumen, but of her character. You're trapped, cornered, staring down the barrel of a powerful man's wrath. Would you still fight, or would you fold? The memory of the baby's face in the photograph, the echo of Lily's innocent chatter about the special house, spurred Anna into action. She knew she couldn't stay silent. The cost to her conscience was too high. She decided to confront Eleanor Vance first, hoping to find an ally, or at least some answers. She found Eleanor in her office late one night, surrounded by stacks of legal documents, a solitary figure in the vast, empty building. Anna laid the faded photograph on Eleanor's desk. Eleanor's eyes, usually so guarded, softened almost imperceptibly as she looked at it. "Clara," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "My sister and her son, Thomas." Anna felt a gasp catch in her throat. Clara Vance was Eleanor's sister, and the child was Eleanor's nephew. The weight of the secret, the decades of silence, pressed down on them both. Eleanor, it turned out, had been the one to arrange Clara and Thomas's quiet departure, Thorne's promise of a substantial trust fund for Thomas turning into a paltry monthly stipend that barely kept them afloat, far from Thorne's knowledge. Controlled by a predatory legal loophole Thorne's lawyers had engineered. Eleanor had been trapped, a silent protector, ensuring her sister and nephew survived, but never truly thrived. Anna, with Eleanor's quiet help, meticulously pieced together the full story. Clara Vance, a bright art student, had met a young, ambitious Richard Thorne in his early days. Their passionate affair had resulted in Thomas. Thorne, on the cusp of his major breakthrough land deal, had seen Clara and their child as an impediment to his carefully crafted image as a ruthless, eligible bachelor. He had paid her off, secured her silence with legal threats and a paltry sum, effectively erasing them from his life. The special house Lily had drawn was a small cottage on the edge of the condemned land, where Clara and Thomas had lived for a short, desperate time before Eleanor found them. The secret tunnel was an old, overgrown access path Thorne sometimes used to visit in secret, a path only Lily, in her innocent curiosity, had discovered. The trust fund for Thomas had indeed been established, but it was structured to be nearly impossible to access, tying up funds in legal red tape designed to outlast Clara and ensure Thomas never truly benefited without Thorne's explicit and withheld approval. This was the climax. Anna realized the depths of Thorne's cruelty, not just as a businessman, but as a man. Her decision was no longer about her career. It was about human dignity, about righting a decades-old wrong. She assembled an anonymous dossier, a meticulously documented account of Thorne's past, Clara and Thomas's story, and the fraudulent trust fund, complete with the photograph and Eleanor's sworn testimony. She leaked it to a prominent investigative journalist, a woman known for her tenacity and independence, ensuring it couldn't be traced back to Thorne Enterprises. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The headlines screamed, "Billionaire mogul's hidden child and decades-old deception uncovered. Thorne Enterprises stock plummeted. Investigations were launched. The empire was shaken to its core." Anna lost her job, her reputation in corporate circles in tatters, branded as a traitor, a backstabber. But as she watched the news reports, a quiet sense of peace settled over her. Thomas, now a middle-aged man living a quiet life, finally had access to his rightful inheritance, and his mother's story was finally told. The empire, battered but not broken, eventually stabilized. Richard Thorne, in a damage control campaign, publicly acknowledged Thomas, offering a carefully worded statement of regret, painting himself as a victim of misguided youth and legal complexities. He escaped any major legal repercussions, his power too entrenched, his lawyers too skilled. But the sheen was gone. The myth of the self-made man, untarnished and invincible, was forever tainted. Anna, ostracized from the corporate world, found herself back where she started, but with a different kind of wealth. She had lost everything she had worked for, but gained something far more valuable, her conscience. She eventually started her own small consulting firm, focusing on ethical business practices, a niche she would have scoffed at a year ago. She sometimes saw Lily with her family in the park, still a whirlwind of blonde curls, still innocently chatting about her grandpa. Anna would smile, a genuine, unburdened smile, knowing that sometimes the smallest voice can carry the biggest truth. In the end, what price do we put on truth, and who truly wins when the secrets finally spill?